The only reason you can tell this movie takes place in Australia is because the last scene just shows you the back of the Sydney Opera House, and they have a whole bunch of characters who speak in an Australian accent. In my opinion, I don't think there is any comedy more lazy than accent comedy. You wouldn't believe how many jokes there are in this movie where the punchline is literally just Australians talk funny. It is already becoming so cliche and eye-roll inducing to have the black best friend of the male lead. I mean, this exact thing happened in Silver Linings Playbook. This exact thing happened in A Star is Born. I swear, it feels like sometimes they just put this black character in the movie just so they can say this one line, "White people, am I right?" Romantic comedies always have this boring, flat color scheme that feels like a real estate reality show. It just lets you know that we're not going to go anywhere deep, anywhere offensive. We're just going to keep it neutral with soft colors, like this movie was made by the Property Brothers. The only reason these films are successful is because they have furniture porn instead of actual porn. Because all of us working class citizens who would never own a house as big as the houses in this movie get to go to the theater and pretend for a few hours that we could one day have the kind of houses that these people have. This isn't a movie written by people who've studied Shakespeare. This is a movie written by people who sell things on Etsy. I personally think the easiest litmus test to see if a movie is going to go anywhere deep is to look at the soundtrack listing. If you're watching a movie where you can take the songs that play at the beginning of the film and switch it with the songs that play at the end of the film and see no difference, then you're watching a flatline movie, not a movie with a climax, which again is a problem for a movie about sex. This movie has zero subtext whatsoever. For the first half of this movie, all of the dialogue is like a sitcom where Sydney Sweeney says an insult, wait for it, and then the man makes an insult, wait for it, beat, and then Sydney Sweeney makes an insult, and it just goes back and forth like this for like the first hour and a half. Nobody in real life is clever enough to do one-liners back and forth. You only do this writing in sitcoms. And like sitcoms, this movie desperately needed a laugh track because I found almost none of those one-liners funny. Because of course, none of these insults were actually biting or offensive. They were the kind of cheesy insults you would hear during a family board game night. You can't write scathing, biting dialogue if both the characters are flat with zero personality, because then what nerve are you going to strike a chord with? If I had to pick just one fatal flaw in the sea of errors with this movie, it would have to be the fact that this film has zero conflict. Quick pop quiz. I want you to think about all the movies you know which have a love triangle in which there's a jealous man who's trying to harm the main couple. You might think about the Twilight series. You might think about Titanic. You might even think of like books like Pride and Prejudice or A Court of Thorn and Roses. In every single one of those examples, if there's an ex-girlfriend or an ex-boyfriend involved, the drama just writes itself. This movie has an ex-boyfriend and an ex-girlfriend, and there's zero conflict between them. What was the point of even having the exes at the resort if they're just going to cheer on the couple? The ex-girlfriend is literally the one who convinces the man to go back and get Sydney Sweeney. What is this? Just because we live in a politically correct society right now, we can't have any conflict in a movie without worrying about the mental health of the viewers? As a married man who is dragged into watching a lot of films and TV shows targeted at women, there's a particular sweet spot that these films need to hit. I'll give an example I saw in Bridgerton. Anytime there is a very quiet dinner going on between a man, a woman, and the man's mistress, and the man and woman are talking about how much they love each other, and the mistress or the side chick is just quietly giggling or even just stewing in her own anger because she knows the man really loves her. That is the peak dynamic that women are looking for when they go to watch a chick flick. I've seen it. It is such sweet irony that the male actor in this movie looks like a copy of the guy in the TV show This Is Us, because this whole film is trying to go for the exact same vibe as This Is Us, where everybody gets along and there has to be a sappy moment every 2 minutes. I actually liked the TV show This Is Us for the first couple episodes, and I remember I stopped watching when they're like, oh man, we gotta find out the backstory of the doctor who delivered the 3 kids. This movie has the same vibe as Instant Family with Mark Wahlberg and A Man Called Otto with Tom Hanks, and those aren't even romance movies, but this movie is just so sterilized. I remember hearing this story in the making of Dead Poets Society, where every single kid gets up on his and her desk and says, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," to kind of show gratitude to Robin Williams' character. And one of the boys doesn't get on the desk because his character has been an asshole the entire movie. It's okay to have that kind of realism in the movie. You don't need to write these artificial movies where all the ex-girlfriends and all the ex-boyfriends get together in the end and hug each other and hug it out. This is not how real life works. You are not portraying art, you are portraying sap. Let's do another thought experiment. I want you to think about every time in your life that you were around a mailman or a garbage man or an Uber driver, and just think how many of those people went to you and said, "Go get that girl that you're in love with. Don't let them run out of your life." How many times has that legitimately happened in your life? But in this movie, everyone's saying that. Don't let her get away. She's the special one. Even the helicopter pilot in this movie says that to the male lead to go get Sydney Sweeney. It's like even when Hollywood writers are trying to make a movie sexy, they don't even know how to anymore. I recently watched this Philip DeFranco video in which he said that this movie and Challengers are basically bringing sex back to movies, but they're not though. The spiciness of a film is not determined by how much clothes you can take off of the 2 characters. The true sexiness of a romance film is determined by how much of a presence you can command with the nudity of your body. Think about the film Fatal Attraction and how much power that Glenn Close conveys in the elevator as she undresses. Think about the film Basic Instinct and how much command that Sharon Stone brings to the film just by uncrossing her legs. Cameron Diaz in The Mask commands more sexuality, and that's a kid's movie. There's more conflict and tension in Beauty and the Beast, and that's also a kid's movie. You think it's supposed to be sexy and heat-inducing when this guy and Sydney Sweeney spend like 5 minutes making jokes about grabbing each other's butts? That's not bringing sex back into film. That's bringing Ren and Stimpy into film. Our society is so lost on what it means to be sexy these days that this film and films like it are closer to Ren and Stimpy than they are to Basic Instinct. And it's not just how this film tries to portray Sydney Sweeney's naked body as something goofy, but they try to play it like the male lead's body is something he should be ashamed of, like a little sissy. It was honestly reminiscent about what Cat Williams says about Kevin Hart putting on a dress. With Channing Tatum, with John Cena, when these guys get nude in film now, it's treated like some kind of emasculating ritual. Go back to films in the 90s and the 80s, and when men get naked in those movies, they command it. They exude confidence. They don't act like, whoopsie, silly me, please look away. That's not sexy energy. I don't know what the hell that is. When it comes to a romance film, a huge factor that separates the great ones from the forgettable ones is how creative are these characters when they physically interact with each other. Think about the upside down kiss in Spider-Man. Think about Ghost when Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore make The Pottery together. Think about Rocky Balboa with Adrian when they go to the ice rink and they beg for the manager to leave the ice rink open just a little bit longer and nobody's there but them. You can argue that a scene is more romantic the less convenient the setting is. Of course, that's not going to happen in a movie like this, where the couple lives in extravagance and they have your obligatory cooking scene together, they do a little bit of flirting, and then they actually just skip over the physicality. And then we're supposed to understand for the rest of the movie why these two are just meant for each other. I find the number one factor that determines whether these romantic comedies are realistic or they're just fake is how much blame do they place on each partner. In great romantic films, the man and the woman share equal blame, but in the cheesy, superficial romantic comedies, they place all the blame on the man. This movie is no different. Sydney Sweeney literally leaves the next morning because she's afraid of this dude, and yet, as you might expect, the man still has to make this grand gesture to pick up the woman and say sorry to her at the end of the movie. Bitch, you left. Why does the man need to apologize to you? So it's not like they didn't just try half-assing it by giving Sydney Sweeney these lawyer aspirations. Just having a character state her career aspirations doesn't make her a personality. The number one rule of movie making, you show, you don't tell. Think about 50 First Dates. You can't go through one part of that movie without knowing the aspirations of both Adam Sandler or Drew Barrymore. Through his actions, we see that Adam Sandler has a special relationship with each of his aquatic friends. We see that he has a captain's log he's practicing, and the movie ends with them on the boat he's been talking about the entire time. That's why my sister, my cousins, my aunt, they all remember 50 First Dates, but they're going to forget this movie in about a month or two. Maybe this is just my personal opinion, but I do not believe slapstick comedy works when a sexy person is doing it while looking sexy. This is not a gender thing. I think that the characters of Meredith and Phyllis always have some spot-on physical humor. In The Office, I think that there's plenty of physical humor in Bridesmaids, but you can't have this kind of slapstick comedy when Sydney Sweeney is sticking her butt in front of another man. Another integral part of a romantic comedy is to have a beta couple to contrast with the alpha couple. But the beta couple in this film has absolutely no personality. They're just lesbians, and I guess that's supposed to be their personality. Think about how much Jim and Pam contrast with Dwight and Angela. Think about how much Robert Barone and Amy contrast with Raymond and Deborah Barone and Everybody Loves Raymond. I think comparing this movie to a sitcom is giving this too much credit, because even sitcoms know how to make an alpha couple and a beta couple. There's this episode of The Simpsons where the mother, Marge Simpson, leads a protest against the cartoon Itchy and Scratchy because she considers it far too violent. And so she wins. The writers of Itchy and Scratchy start to write episodes where Itchy and Scratchy just sit on a porch all day saying how much they love each other. Anyone But You is a film written by a mom who she just wants everyone to participate and have fun. This is a Marge Simpson participation trophy film. And I should point out that I love Sydney Sweeney as an actress. I think she's the closest actress we have to somebody who can match the dangerous tension of a Glenn Close or of a Sharon Stone or a Michelle Pfeiffer. But because the writers don't allow Sydney Sweeney to be dangerous when she's just disagreeable, she comes off as a spoiled, annoying brat. Her character in this movie reminds me of the toxic actress in Happy Death Day, except we don't get to see Sydney Sweeney murdered 50 times like as in that movie, so we get the sweet, cathartic experience. This is why Nicholas Sparks' books do so well with women, because the female leads in those books always have these strong convictions that women could get behind. They sanded the edges of this movie so much that I actually get surprised when the characters still swear. But don't worry, they pull it back by making sure the male lead is afraid of heights and he can't swim. This movie literally ends with the male lead calling himself a bitch. I'm not making this up. This movie doesn't portray what women find attractive. This movie portrays what women want to pretend they find attractive. The plot device of the male lead and female lead pretending to be in a relationship is such a tired trope. It only works when the two characters legitimately don't like each other at the beginning of the film, like in 10 Things I Hate About You. That's why the grand gesture of this movie feels so hollow, because A, the guy did nothing wrong, so he shouldn't have to apologize to Sydney Sweeney. B, he's not the one riding the helicopter. It's not his grand gesture. It's the female helicopter pilot's grand gesture. The grand gesture in 10 Things I Hate About You was legitimately memorable because Heath Ledger's character was legitimately a jerk to Julia Stiles' character for much of the beginning of the film. This is also why the low point in the movie feels completely hollow and meaningless, because if the two leads were pretending to be in a relationship this whole time as a joke, then how are we suddenly supposed to take it seriously when they fake break up from a fake relationship? This movie is so hell-bent on making sure Sydney Sweeney doesn't actually do anything mean that in the low point of the movie, it's the dog that ruins the wedding cake and Sydney Sweeney apologizes for it. It wasn't her fault, it was the dog's fault. You can quite easily compare the low point of this movie to the low point of Bridesmaids, where Kristen Wiig's character destroys everything that Rose Byrne's character made, and see how much superior that movie is to this one. When Kristen Wiig can out-dangerous Sydney Sweeney in a movie, you know you have script problems. This is why I personally consider Kate Winslet the queen of romance films, because she's always the flawed character in the couple of all the movies she's in, whether it be Titanic or Eternal Sunshine or Little Children or even the one where she portrays a freaking Nazi. Kate Winslet seems to be one of the few actresses who understands that the truly deep romance films look at the flaws that women have as well as men in a relationship. Because this is a flat movie, there are so many unnecessary characters in this film, not just the ex-boyfriends and the ex-girlfriends, but even the parents. Why are they in it? Why didn't they just make this a movie where it's just the woman and the man, like Before Sunrise? Again, if you're going to put parents in it, then create some tension. Think about like all the Ben Stiller movies like Meet the Fockers. The humor in that movie comes from the legitimate underlying tension of how much Ben Stiller wants to stick it to Robert De Niro's character and prove that he's worthy of his daughter, which is a very relatable experience. Which all comes back to my main problem with these films. They are getting too sappy. And I gotta say, when I told my wife how stupid I thought this movie was, my wife rolled her eyes and she said, "Oh, well, honey, it's not supposed to be taken seriously. This movie's not trying to win an Oscar or anything." Now, I do acknowledge that a majority of people would probably agree with what my wife told me, but I honestly think that line of thinking is more toxic than the mental health issues this movie's trying to avoid giving people. Why are women content with filmmakers making stupid movies for them? I promise you, it is possible for a romantic comedy to be an artistic masterpiece. Think about the film Groundhog Day. That movie's technically a romantic comedy, and it's a movie that's been discussed in churches and with monks because of the deep philosophical message that it touches upon. Annie Hall was a romantic comedy, and it was one of the greatest films ever made, which beat Star Wars for the Oscar for Best Picture. Romantic comedies do not have to suck. This is why Brad Bird has made some of the greatest children's films ever made, like The Iron Giant, like The Incredibles, like Ratatouille. It's because Brad Bird is vehemently against the idea that children's films have to be stupid because children are stupid. Brad Bird doesn't make movies which insult the intelligence of children, and so all these chick flick writers need to stop making movies which insult the intelligence of women. I'm gonna be honest, I grew up without a father, and Lion King to this day is like the gold standard for me when it comes to a film about a father and son relationship. I can't get through the scene where Mufasa shows Simba the night sky without tearing up a little bit. And that's technically a cartoon made about talking lions. In any event, if idiots are going to keep making idiotic films, then high standards people like me should be allowed to call them idiots. Sorry if that hurts the feelings of the people who want to turn their brains off when watching a movie like this. Maybe you can turn your heart off and stop getting offended by everything. Then maybe we can go back to making romantic films which are actually sexy and comedic films which are actually funny.